So last Tuesday, I was giving a Dhamma talk for the Wat Bhutanasaran community in Fremont, California. And I decided to talk about one of the discourses the Buddha gave that's quite well known and popular, but it feels like it's a good thing to kind of revisit it from time to time. And it's his teaching that he gave to his son Rahula when Rahula was quite young. The commentary tells us that Rahula was probably about 7 years old at the time, and he had already joined the monastic sangha, and he's the son of the Buddha. That's got to be a pretty interesting situation. And in this discourse or teaching that the Buddha gave to Rahula, it's very beautiful teaching, and I'll talk a little bit about it. But on Tuesday night, for the first time, I recognized something in it that I hadn't seen before. And it's a good reminder that we might look at a sutta many times and still come away with something new the next time. And in this case, what I saw, besides what the Buddha said to Rahula, is what he didn't say or what he didn't do. And I want to share the beginning of the sutta with you and kind of point out what I noticed. So it starts out with, as usual, where the Buddha was staying. It was in Rajagaha. And at that time, the Venerable Rahula was nearby. And late in the afternoon, the Buddha went to see Rahula at his little hut. And as Rahula saw the Buddha coming in the distance, he spread out a seat for him and placed a pot of water next to it so the Buddha could wash his feet. This is very common, sort of polite protocol. And the Buddha sat down on that seat and he washed his feet. And Rahula bowed to the Buddha and sat down to one side. And then the Buddha left a little bit of water in the water pot that he used to wash his feet. And he said to Rahula, "Do you see this little bit of water left in the pot?" And Rahula says, "Yes, sir." And the Buddha says, that's how little of the ascetic's nature is left. So that's really in Pali, the samana life. That's how little one's holy life or samana life, how little is left in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. So you get this sense that Rahula lied that day. And then the Buddha tosses the water out of the pot and he says, "Do you see this little bit of water that was tossed away?" And Rahula says, "Yes." That's how the ascetic's nature or the samana life is tossed away in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. And then the Buddha turns the pot upside down and says, "Do you see how this pot is turned upside down?" And Rahula said, "Yes." That's how the samana's life is turned upside down in those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. And then the Buddha, turning the pot right side up again, says, "Do you see how this pot is vacant and hollow?" And Rahula says, "Yes." That's how vacant and hollow one's holy life is, and for those who are not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie. And then he goes into this simile. Remember, Rahula's a little 7-year-old boy. So this is going to be, he's going to have his attention with this. He says, "Suppose there was a royal bull elephant with tusks like chariot poles, able to draw a heavy load and, really well bred and battle hardened. And in the battle, it uses its front feet and its hind feet and its forequarters and its hindquarters and its head, its ears, tusks, and tail, but it still protects its trunk. So its rider thinks this royal bull elephant still protects its trunk. It has not given its life. And when the royal bull elephant is in battle and it uses all the parts, and then it also uses its trunk, the rider thinks this royal bull elephant in battle uses all of itself. It has given its life. Now there's nothing that royal bull elephant not do. And in the same way, the Buddha says to Rahula, when someone is not ashamed to tell a deliberate lie, there's no bad deed that they would not do, I say. And then he tells him, so you should train yourself. I will not tell a lie, even as a joke. So just taking this part, the rest of the sutta is a beautiful teaching, but just taking this part, I was interested in seeing what the Buddha didn't do. So we're all familiar with the parent-child relationship. Some of us as children, all of us as children, some of us as parents, some of us as both. And you know, what's been your experience when a parent is confronting their child with something that they've done or they suspect they've done? I mean, the Buddha didn't accuse Rahula of lying. He didn't scold him. He didn't try to get him to admit it. He didn't make him apologize. He didn't punish him. You know, he just told him the reality of what happens to a monastic if they're willing to just tell a deliberate lie without any shame or wish to change that. And I find that really interesting and beautiful and respectful. And it just is a lovely example of a teaching that the Buddha gave about this, how to practice non-conflict. So there's another little piece in here to point out, like when the Buddha says, you know, if a mendicant is willing to tell a deliberate lie, there isn't anything they wouldn't do, I say. In reading the suttas, what I notice is when the Buddha says something like I say, it feels a little less like absolute fact and a little more like, this is what I observe in people in general. So it's just a thought on my part, that one. So in thinking about this way of training, of interacting, of sharing, the sutta where the Buddha really addresses this is called the analysis of non-conflict, or the exposition on non-conflict. And there are a few things that the Buddha says that we can do, or ways that we can approach things to avoid conflict. Now, this isn't conflict avoidance, like I don't want to have any conflict, I'm going to just bypass it, but it's skillful ways of interacting. And so the first thing the Buddha talks about is avoiding the two extremes of indulgence in sensual pleasures and indulgence in self-mortification. So those two extremes that he found to lead to a lot of stress, anxiety, suffering, and instead using the middle way, which leads to vision and knowledge and peace, direct knowledge, awakening, and nirvana. And so he talks about those things. That way of taking the middle way is one way to not have conflict. So he's not just talking about conflict with people, he's talking about inner conflict too, I think. This is the way to peace. This is the point of his whole teaching. But in this case, some of the other things he brings out are also really interesting. And the one I'm going to focus on is the next one, which is he talks about non-conflict in terms of glorifying some people or praising some people and disparaging or rebuking other people. And we're going to go more into that detail. And in addition to this part that we're going to look at a little more closely, he talks about knowing how to assess different kinds of happiness. So knowing the difference between worldly happiness and spiritual happiness, basically, and knowing how to pursue inner happiness, spiritual happiness, or spiritual pleasure, inner pleasure. And then he also says, don't talk behind people's backs, don't speak harshly in their presence, don't speak hurriedly, don't insist on your own terminology, don't override the normal usage of language. So these are other ways to avoid conflict. But if we look closely at this idea of not glorifying or disparaging people, it's interesting because it feels a little bit subtle in the way he uses the language. So he says, when you say something like, if you say it that way, maybe not. When one says something like pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, and pointless, all those who indulge in such happiness are beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever. They are practicing the wrong way. That just brings up conflict, perhaps. It's a way of disparaging people who, so he says, instead, say, the indulgence in sensual pleasure is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever. It is the wrong way. So the difference between saying, oh, all of you people are wrong who are doing this, you just say, this is the principle, this is how it works. And then the other side, how do you glorify with the same idea? Pleasure linked to sensuality is low, crude, ordinary, ignoble, pointless. All those who have broken off such indulgence are free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and they're practicing in the right way. So he says, don't say that. that's going to bring up that glorifies some. So this you can see how if you're talking to people, it's gonna like lift some people up and put other people down. He says, instead, you just say breaking off the indulgence in sensual pleasure is a principle free of pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it's the right way. So when one does that, you can say the exact same thing regardless of what other people are doing, where they're at with those ideas or those actions. And the truth really is where most of us are probably, doing some of it and breaking off some of it. And, it's all over the place. So there's no accusation. It's just encouragement to look at how this works and to see how, now again, we've talked about sensual pleasure and the kinds of things that are uplifting and comforting and bring a certain level of real happiness in terms of spiritual joy, but the sensual pleasure that brings up this discomfort and unrest and distress, to be aware of that and to just recognize the results. So the Buddha he says, don't say these things that build praise some and disparage others, just teach the Dhamma, is what he's saying. So it also is the same kind of thing with the self-mortification. If someone says, oh, that's bad, anybody who's doing that is going to be, like suffering from pain, harm, stress, etc. So instead, just the principle. Indulgence in self-mortification is a principle beset by pain, harm, stress, and fever, and it's the wrong way. On the other side of it, if you've broken away from self-mortification, instead of praising that, just that breaking off of indulgence in self-mortification frees one from pain, harm, stress, and fever. It's the right way. Then the Buddha goes into the same thing with regard to giving up fetters that lead to rebirth. So it's the same idea. If you say those who haven't given up the fetters are, bound for pain and suffering, and they're practicing in the wrong way, it's disparaging, it's discouraging. But instead, just state, when the fetter of rebirth is not given up, then rebirth is not given up. It's the way the Buddha says it. If you don't let go of what's holding you in samsara, then you're going to get reborn. But if you let go of what's holding you in samsara, you don't get reborn. And so it's really lovely to think about how it is for ourselves in our own life. And I want to say that I haven't mastered this. I know that. And it's something that I think is a challenge when we're dealing with our own patterns of speech and behavior, and many of the examples in our life are not this way. Do put people down and build people up, and to just reflect on this. How can the resistance be avoided, and just talk about the way things work. So a couple of days ago, I heard an interview with someone who I saw is doing this in real life in a very interesting way. And they probably aren't Buddhists. They probably don't know that there is such a teaching or anything like that. But this is a young woman who lives in Maine. Her name is Chloe Maxman. And I don't know if any of you have ever heard of her. And she has a friend and colleague named Canyon Woodward. And they were students together at Harvard, and they were key organizers in a movement to get Harvard to divest I think it's billions of dollars in their endowment from fossil fuels. So, young people really interested in changing the direction of our society to deal with climate change. And they were successful. And then, still very young and like 25 years old, Chloe runs for state representative in Maine. And what's interesting about both of these folks Chloe and Canyon is that they grew up on farms or in the rural areas. Chloe is from a rural area in Maine. And apparently Maine is the most rural state in the United States. And the county or the area that she grew up in is the most rural county. And she was running as a Democrat in that area that had never elected a Democrat. And she said what she knew is that, you know, they had been looking at this great divide that's happened in our country between the conservative side and the less conservative or more liberal side, I guess you would say, the Democrats and the Republicans. And this talk isn't about politics, but it's looking at a place where we have an enormous conflict in our country right now. And we have for a few years, maybe more than a few years. The last 10 years probably we've been moving in a direction, greater and greater divide among Americans. And I mean, people have talked with us nuns about the stress that has caused in some of their close relationships, losing friends and losing contact with people, or problems in their marriage or whatever, and really based on this particular political struggle. And so when I was hearing this interview, I was really interested because Chloe and Canyon have taken a very different approach to working with people who have different views than they do. And basically what they did was not a campaign to try to, you know, knock on doors to get someone to vote for you, but to knock on doors to have a conversation about what matters to people. And every question that was asked during the interview, I really saw Chloe come forward with something like what the Buddha taught on non-conflict, to really listen, to not push her own ideas. She's not pushing an agenda. She really wants to first establish, you know, what they share. And she said, you know, growing up on a farm in Maine and the area there, she loved it. And she loves the people there and has great respect for them. And, you know, knows as I do, so I grew up on a farm in Indiana, as I do know how much integrity and, you know, beautiful values so many people have, reliable, kind, generous people. And so she said that her camp about really understanding what people needed and wanted. And she got elected as a state representative. And she put forward a bill for a Green New Deal, nothing like the national one, but one that included an effort by, what do we say, alternative energy projects to hire people, young people as apprentices, as part of the requirement for developing renewable energy in the area. And this was something that the people there really wanted, and they voted for it. So this bill went through bipartisan support and signed by the governor, and it's just like this beautiful movement forward. She said it wouldn't work to come in and talk about climate change because there are words that have been developed into polarizing kind of forces. And so you talk about the real problems of like people not being able to continue their livelihood because of the change in climate. things like that. And how do you remedy that? How do you address it? And it's just so much what the Buddha was talking about. How can we really be respectful of each other? How can we really, like here he is, the dad coming to see his son and talk to him about something, and not pull authority over him. He's the Buddha. Instead, to just talk about what happens when you do this. And not even you doing it, but what happens when someone does this, and anyway, I want to recommend having a look at life from this perspective, having a look at situations from this perspective. And if you're interested in the story of Chloe and Canyon, they have a book that recently came out called, let's say, Dirt Road Revival, about their approach. And as I said, I'm not interested in making a case for any kind of view in particular, just maybe the view of loving human beings and respecting what's wholesome and encouraging the wholesome, and being able to address each other in ways that are respectful and encouraging. So that's my offering for this morning. And I think it might be good to meditate for a little while. And then I'd like to hear any comments or questions you have. So we begin, of course, as usual, finding a comfortable position. And we can have the same attitude of respect and kindness towards our bodies, noticing how they feel. Allowing our body to settle into a posture that's conducive for open, free flowing of energy and relaxing, being calm, becoming tranquil. And then depending on how the body is feeling this morning, this afternoon, this evening, whatever time it is, you can know whether it's good to direct the mind attending to various parts of the body to give the painful or tight areas some support, some kindness. And to notice all the areas where there is no pain or discomfort, and appreciating that. Using our meditation object to ground ourselves and bring even more comfort. Instead of focusing on it in a way that brings more tightness, Sometimes when we use words like focus or concentration, it can lead to a tightening around whatever object we're paying attention to, but instead just directing our attention to that one focus, to that one hopefully beautiful, lovely, inviting object like our breath or some area of the body or loving kindness, compassion, appreciative joy or equanimity, the earth, water, fire, air, whatever your object is. And there are other possibilities. May it be one that the mind delights in, wants to pay attention to, brings you peace and happiness, a sense of letting go, putting down whatever we might be carrying. Sometimes, as a couple of people mentioned earlier, we might want to put our attention on something that balances out the experiences we've been having this week. Bringing in more kindness or compassion, wisdom, generosity, Welcome back, everyone. Cynthia.
Thank you. Thank you especially for that story about the young woman in Maine, which gives me some hope. It also reminds me, I don't know if you've heard of, there's an organization called Braver Angels that their whole focus is bringing together people from very opposite sides of the political spectrum and having conversations, trying to have some civil conversations. So anyway, but going back to the beginning of the sutta and the not ever telling a deliberate lie, and I'm just wondering where, and I've heard other things like that before, like that in all of the Buddha's previous rebirths, he did other bad things, but he never ever told a lie. But where does intention come in there? And what I'm thinking of is I had this thing happen a few weeks ago that I keep kind of going back to, where I was talking with my wife, and I don't even remember what the incident was, but I was doing something for her. I was doing something. It was one of those things that she can't do for herself anymore. And I was doing something to help her. And it was one of those things that, it's like some days it's fine and some days it's a real pain in the butt. And she asked me, she says, "Is this a lot of trouble for you?" And I just instantly said, "Oh no, I don't mind it at all." And it was a total lie, but it just came out of my mouth. But if I'd had time to reflect on, I don't know that I would have answered it differently, because I know how she is, and she would feel terrible, and she would not want me to do this for her anymore. And that wouldn't seem like it wouldn't be for anybody's benefit. So, or maybe there's also a difference between something that's where you're speaking about your feelings as opposed to factual information. I don't know if that comes in. Anyway, just wondering if you have any comments about that.
I do. I want to first point out that the Buddha was talking about not having shame to tell a deliberate lie. And that's important to notice, like that person who he thinks would be able to do anything unwholesome, it's because they have no misgivings or shame about it, no hesitation, no reflection. And then the rest of the sutta talks about reflection on what we're going to do or say, what we are doing and saying, what we did do and say and think also. Anyway, so there's that. And then I really appreciate your example. And you're teasing apart this, like what we say about how we feel, our feelings, and what we know happened, or to the best of our perception, what we think the facts are, because it is different. I mean, if you did have time to reflect, you would come up with kind of what I was hearing is, at a deep level, no, this is not a pain. On the superficial, how do I feel today? Ugh, yeah, but that's not what's really important, because when it comes to feeling, we know it's going to change. It's very unreliable. It isn't really what we want to use to govern our life, and the feeling of being tired or being frustrated or being irritated in a moment, as compared to, what we really feel on a deep level. So even when we talk about feeling, there's different grades or qualities. I mean, the Buddha says, like when you have insight, it with the body. There's a feeling there. That's when we talk about a gut feeling, right? That's a different thing than just our mood or our intention. I mean, not intention, our mood or our kind of like emotion. That's what I meant to say. So I do think that these things, these distinctions matter. And I really I really appreciate a story that Ajahn Brahm told that I heard once. A lot of his stories I've heard, I feel like 100 times. This one I think I've only heard once. And it was about this couple that had been coming to his monastery and teachings for a very long time and had been practicing for a very long time. And the wife in this couple came to the Buddha and was very disturbed about something she had done. And it was that her husband had had a heart attack, I think it was, and was in the hospital, and he was awaiting surgery. And in the hospital room, there was another person, another man, who also was awaiting surgery for the same exact thing. And he was going first in the morning, and then her husband was going to be going into the operating room right after. And when the roommate, he actually died during the surgery. And her husband, before he was going to go in, he asked her how was Joe, or whatever his name is. And she said, I lied. I told him he was doing fine. Because if I had told him he had died on the table, oh my God, that would have probably killed him right there. And I couldn't do it. And then after, of course, her husband had gotten through the surgery and recovered, and they had a chance to talk about it, she told him that she had lied and apologized, but she still was worried about it. And she talked to Ajahn Brahm, and he said, so how long have you been married? And something like 43 years or something. And he said, okay, you get one lie every 43 years. And it's just like, yeah, intention matters a lot. It matters a lot. And that's not a it's not a pass to lying. We need to do our best to be clever. And I don't mean clever in a deceitful way at all. I mean smart, intelligent, discerning around ways that we can answer questions that give the right kind of picture of what's happening. And sometimes if we say things in a way that's factual, but is going to lead the other person to have the wrong impression, that's not exactly correct either. Sometimes what someone's going to think of something, and then we have to be careful, not to just blurt out what's going to lead them to have really the wrong impression. If that makes any sense. So I think to tune into what you really know about how you want to be with the situation is super important, and sharing from that perspective. A long time ago, I used to think that my feelings mattered and everybody should know what they are. That causes a lot of trouble. And it's completely disruptive. On the topic of non-conflict, we can avoid a lot of conflict by working with what we feel first, and then addressing whatever needs to be addressed.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Holly?
Kind of on that same vein, I have observed in recent years that when I'm sitting with groups of friends, some of which are kind of confrontative and hold their views strongly, that I feel less and less inclined to say anything. It's like I'm not called on to say anything, that people just want to talk. And yeah, I used to want to illuminate them or educate them or have my opinion be heard. And more I'm just kind of sitting back and being like fog or mist and kind of just watching human nature. And then afterward, Gina and I kind of go, yeah, they're like that, kind of chuckle. It's much better. I don't see many reasons to interject my own viewpoint into a diverse opinion anymore. I've never really been, I've always seen both sides of a situation that can be interpersonal and politics. And there's some role, it seems, for compassion and listening, and there's other times to just not be near it. And that's a form of compassion because I'm not whipping the flames or being part of continuing an interaction that has negative impacts on one party, both directions. Anyway, it's been interesting for me to step back.
Yeah. Yes, it is interesting. And, wait for someone to say, what do you think? It's like, we'll see if that happens.
Yeah, if that happens. Usually it doesn't, because even if I say, well, this is a topic where many people have disagreements, then they tend to like just dig in deeper because their view is so much more important than the other view that they have to tell me more about it. My brother's like that.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's where there's conflict, I mean, so I don't know about your experience, but usually in my background, people would joke about the two topics you should always avoid, which are politics and religion. And, the Buddha that was his job, talk about religion, so he was learning how to do it without creating conflict. And yeah, it's interesting. And just a comment from listening to Chloe Maximum talk about her experience. She had lots of really great conversations, hundreds of them, with people in their kitchen or on their porch, and then she was asked, well, what about those times when someone says something that you find really offensive? And she said that was the hardest thing but to learn, but she learned to just say, thank you for your time talking with me. I need to go now, and to not react to that. And so, there's always going to be that kind of challenge somewhere along the line in our experience. And it's really important to train ourselves. And like I said, I'm working on it. it's not an easy fix to our habit patterns, but it's worth it. I saw a little something in the chat, and it was a question about the number on the sutta, and it is 139 in the Majjhima Nikaya. And the one about Rahula is number 1 and number 61 in the Majjhima Nikaya. Danny?
I think that I loved your talk this morning, and I'm thinking like, well, I've gotten much better at sort of like giving my opinion, uh, but I think I've only gotten really just more devious about it. Is in some ways that I listen well, but there's sort of a back of my mind is I'm still trying to get my way, or but I but I but I feel more refined about it, and and how and how just coming here makes me always think about. It challenges me. This is so challenging because it feels like, oh my gosh, I have to change my whole life, and and or at least at least I'm more aware, at least becoming aware. But then it feels like if I'm aware of some unwholesome behavior, then I have to stop it. And the way out of that is to really truly listen. There's that subtle difference between like listening so that I can almost build up this little credibility. So then, and it's not as conscious of that, but it's there. And the other thing is the sort of the gossip, which of talking about people, how I feel I'm worlds different in that, and yet it comes up quite a lot. But I think like it's okay, and it's not until I kind of reflect on it, so it wasn't okay that and why do I do that? It's like it never helps. It doesn't change anything, but I think I'm trying to build an alliance with someone else I'm with so that they will. It's very tribal, and it shows up a lot for me. I play pickleball, and I feel like all of which feels pickleball is more and more feeling like a spiritual practice because all of my character flaws show up there in my competition and how I will walk away from a game and say to a friend, "Oh, I don't like that guy. I don't like the way he played," or something that he did that I felt kind of insulted me. Rather than just saying that's rather than why say nothing why say anything at all and just and then not seeing like, oh, he's doing the best that he can. And if he does say something insulting, oh, say like, oh, what's going on in his world? Rather than practicing compassion for for him and for myself. And just noticing, oh, I want to gossip. And then like, oh. And even having a friends, I even be able to express that to somebody. I want to gossip, but I'm not. But but it's very, very good to be here and how all of these and I think that's what I liked a lot about you talking about these two women is I didn't talk about the Buddha. Is that how much of this our practice here? It's not meant for just here for our sangha. It's for us to carry this to. We're all monks in a way. We're all like should be carrying this to the rest of our lives. And and that's hard, and I just love that I can be in this place with you guys and be who I am. Thanks.
Thank you, Danny. And yeah, the monk-like part, it's more like you're a noble disciple, whether you're monastic or lay, a noble disciple in the Buddha's sasana. And yeah, that's what our thing is. We carry it into our life, our whole life becomes aligned with Dhamma and is beautiful. And we can be ourselves, and we can have, the things we haven't learned yet. It's okay. It's all about that intention to reflect and make changes. They're really beautiful, really beautiful. Thank you, Danny. One more. Yes, Ling?
Thank you, Ayya, for this talk. I thought I was the person always trying to avoid conflict, but somehow my life always had conflicts. But when I was hearing what you were talking about, that story for Rahula, Buddha to Rahula, I heard many times. I love that story because I have son, and I also really want to teach him the honesty, and it's the basic for life. But I never thought that teaching is for the non-conflicts until today, when you taught. And because I just reflected this week, I saw one of my colleagues was doing something for the students. She did that because she had ill will towards another teacher. It was I feel like very unskillful, is hurtful. And of course, I didn't go there, talk to her, but instead I spoke to a colleague of mine in the office who is very kind, and I just said all those things, but I didn't realize until now I actually was creating conflicts, and I was talking behind. And that colleague, it's in my opinion, was very unkind and cruelty, but I said that to my another colleague, and I am actually I'm making the same thing. I didn't realize until now. And so that's also kind of very I feel like, wow, that was something kind of explain why I have so many conflicts. I had so many conflicts in my life. I never thought about it. So thank you so much. And also made me wondering, like, wow, how can I practice, further? Because I thought, I avoid to go to staff lunch, talk and eat lunch with them and join the negative complaining, or that's already protecting. But I realized I actually have to protect my own self, which is the hardest one, seems. Yeah, that's just some reflection, and very, very grateful for your teaching as well. And thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you, Ling. That's a really, really powerful realization. I mean, I don't know of anyone who hasn't fallen into that. And it's just such a great thing when we start to recognize, really what the Buddha is saying about how things work. And in another place, the Buddha talks about how when we talk about someone's unskillful qualities, we cover up their skillful qualities. And if I really have thought about that recently, because I can see how it is, it's like when I tell someone about something unskillful someone is doing, or say something like that, then that's the image that person has. They may not know about that person's skillful qualities. And so it is like kind of covering up their skillful qualities, and then recognizing that my mind can change too about the situation, but that person I talk to doesn't know that, and there's all kinds of things we can learn around this, and starting to see the benefits when we take a different approach. Like, we had a worker here that did some things that we weren't pleased with, and I was tempted to say something about it to the next worker that came, and I didn't. And I'm so glad I didn't, because then later discussing it with the first one, understanding better what was happening, letting them know what our boundaries are, what our requirements are, and they're complying to that and wanting to do better. And it would have all been like out there in the world, if I had talked about it with this other person in a way that would carry that shadow over the first one, it's like, yeah, we, and looking at why would we want to say anything. I liked what people have been saying this morning, because we do have these underlying urges for a reason, that tribalness, that wanting to align with someone, that wanting to express ourselves, or wanting to just maybe unload the tension in our own system in some way. We can understand what those underlying feelings are and what the pressure is about, then we can address that directly. How do I come to peace with this? And this whole thing about non-conflict is about coming to peace with things, not creating more conflict, but creating more peace, or opening the way for peace to arise. So I know we're a little over time. Thank you all so much for your practice. I also love coming to this because I get to see you and I get to hear how you're doing, and I know how serious you all are, and it's really beautiful.